Hey everyone, so it's an e-learning day. Today what we're going to do is a grit lesson number 4 on practice. Then we're going to do a little mini lesson on the brain and neurotransmitters so that you can be ready to do your zombie cure creation. So let's start with grit. Go ahead and open up and print out or open the grit activity number 4. I don't want to miss another opportunity to do one of these. And so some of us are going to be doing it in class and some of us are going to be doing it on e-learning days. So let's just embrace that. So go ahead and open up the grit activity that's on Canvas. And if you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that and come on back when you've got it all printed out or at least open. Okay, so now that you have it open, let's take a look at it. So at the very top, I have the slide that I have in front of you at the top of the page. And I'm going to start with Cody's story and his idea of a mission. And so what I'm going to do is read from my grit book, and I'm going to tell you about Cody, sort of get us in the mood for what the grit activity is about. So Cody was born 30 miles east of Trenton, New Jersey on the Monmouth County Correctional Institution. His mother was declared insane by the FBI, and when Cody came along, was imprisoned for threatening to kill a senator's child. Cody has never met his father. Cody's grandmother took legal custody of him and his brothers and probably saved his life by doing so. She was not a prototypical wise parent or authoritative parent, loving and so forth. She may have wanted to be loving and strict, but both her body and her mind were in decline. As Cody described it, he was soon doing more parenting, cooking, and cleaning than she was. We were poor, Cody explained. When my school did food drives, the food went to my family because we were the poorest in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood itself wasn't all that great. My school district scores below level in every category imaginable. To make matters worse, Cody continued, I wasn't really an athlete or a smart person. I started out in remedial English. My math scores were average at best. And then what happened? One day, my oldest brother, who is 18 years old, older than me, he comes home. It was summer after my freshman year in high school. He drove up from Virginia to pick me up to spend 2 weeks with him. And the drive back to his place, he turned and asked, where do you want to go to college? Cody told him, I don't know. I wanted to go to good school, but maybe something like Princeton, because he lives near in New Jersey. And then immediately he took it back. There was no way a school like Princeton would accept me. Why wouldn't Princeton take you? Cody's brother asked. You're doing all right in school. If you work harder, you can keep pushing yourself so you can get to that level. There's nothing to lose by trying. That's when a flip switched in my head, Cody said. I went from why bother to why not? I knew I might not get into a really good college, but I figured if I tried, I have a chance. If I never try, then I have no chance at all. The next year, Cody threw himself into his schoolwork. By junior year, he was earning straight A's. As a senior, Cody set about finding the best college in the country for computer science and engineering. He changed his dream from Princeton to MIT. During this transformative period, he met Cantel Smith, an exceptionally wise math teacher who all but adopted him. It was Cantel who paid for Cody's driver's lessons. It was Cantel who collected a college dorm fund to pay for the supplies he had gotten. It was Cantel who mailed sweaters, hats, gloves, and warm socks to him for the cold Boston winters. He worried about him every day. He welcomed him home each holiday break, and he stood by Cody at his grandmother's funeral. It was in Cantel's home that Cody first experienced waking up on Christmas morning to presents with his name on it. MIT wasn't entirely smooth sailing, but the new challenges came with an ecosystem of support. Deans, professors, older students in fraternities, rooms, and friends. Compared to what he had been growing up to, MIT was a haven of attention. After graduating with top honors, Cody stayed on his task to get his master's in electrical engineering and computer science, earning a perfect GPA while doing so and at the same time finding offers from doctoral programs and Silicon Valley recruiters. In deciding between an immediate lucrative career and graduating school, Cody did some hard thinking about how he'd gotten to where he was. Next fall, he'd begin a PhD program in computer science at Stanford. Here's the sentence from his application essay. My mission is to utilize my passion for computer science and machine learning to benefit society at large, while serving as an example of success that will shape the future of our society. So Cody Coleman did have not have a psychologically wise mother, father, or grandparent. I wish he had, but he did have a brother who said the right thing at the right time, an extraordinary wise and wonderful math teacher, and an ecosystem of other teacher mentors and fellow students who collectively showed him what's possible and helped him to get there. Cantel refused to take credit for Cody's success. The truth is that Cody had touched my life when I touched his. He taught me that nothing is impossible and no goal is beyond reach. He's one of the kindest human beings I've ever met, and I couldn't be prouder when he calls me Mom. A radio station recently interviewed Cody. Towards the end of the conversation, Cody was asked what he had to say to listeners struggling to overcome similar life circumstances. Stay positive, Cody said. Go past those negative beliefs in what's possible and impossible and just give it a try. So that's Cody's mission that you have in front of you on your sheet. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about maybe what your mission is. Write down what you can about your overall goals. Look at what Cody's mission was. And you've done some things on interest. You've done your career, kind of looked at some skills for that and whatnot. And I want you to think about also impact on others, which we haven't gotten to quite yet for purpose. But it's sort of purpose is in that mission as well. But I want you to write down, first of all, what's your mission, okay? Now you're going to be completing this after and submitting it. So I'm going to move on to the next thing that I want you to do. And I want you to think about what your stretch goal is. So that's the second question. When we are doing and developing practice and we were thinking about an overall mission that we have and then what we want to do and how we want to practice. Practice is daily discipline of trying to do things better, leading to zeroing in on your weaknesses, resisting complacency, like, oh, it's good enough, and then looking for mastery. If you look at the quote from Kevin Durant, he's an NBA basketball player, if you didn't know that, he said, 70% of my time is spent by myself fine-tuning my game. Okay, and so deliberate practice is something that Angela Duckworth in her book and her research for grit has discovered. And I have those at the very top of your page. And deliberate practice is finding a stretch goal. You may have several of them, but you're going to pick one, something that you want to do. And it could be based on the interest that you had, your career. It could be based on a skill you know you need to have for that goal in the future that we came up with last time, those top 10 goals or skills. Maybe there's one on there you're like, yeah, I could probably work on that better. So pick a stretch goal, just one for now. And then the next thing to do with deliberate practice is learning to strive to reach that goal, seeking feedback, and then once you get that feedback, reflecting and refining by trying again based on the feedback and how you can improve. So the second thing I want you to do on your activity today is what is your stretch goal? It needs to be a weakness, not a strength. It's very important that we don't work just on our strengths. We need to actually identify our challenges and our weaknesses and work on a weakness. So you need to be sort of true to yourself. Look at those skills, those basic skills, if it's communication or organization or whatever it might be, or it could be something completely different where you're trying to think of something that has you want to have real practice in and look at a goal that you want to have for that. I want you to really think about that as well. Okay. And then part of the striving to achieve that goal is how you focus and concentrate on that goal in order to strive to master it so that you can then move on to the next stretch goal. So we may not do this several times, but the idea is that once you do it once and you start thinking about a stretch goal and you start kind of focusing on it, that maybe once you're done with that, you'll move on to another stretch goal once you've mastered it. So focus and concentration are needed. It's about buckling down, right? It's about striving for something and having that true grit and feeling that true hard work. So focus and concentration. How will you develop focus and concentration for that stretch goal? What's your plan for that? That's sort of what I want in that third question. Okay. And then as it kind of looks I have some things about deliberate practice. So look on your sheet and let's go through deliberate practice. What is it and how can I use it to build grit and achieve my goals? So an example of this is how did the students at the National Spelling Bee that Angela Duckworth looked at. She studied them. How did the students at the National Study Bee practice? So first of all, she asked them and they said, well, I read for pleasure or I played words like Scrabble. Number two, those kids were quizzed by somebody else or they spent time on a computer game. And number three, they also did unassisted, so by themselves, solitary practice and so forth. And that is deliberate practice. The being quizzed and doing things for pleasure is not deliberate practice. It's actually what Kevin Durant's saying, which is 70% of the time he's working on it by himself. And what they said was that kind of practice, even though it was effective, it was less enjoyable and it had more effort on it. Okay. And so the next part I want you to look at as I read through is how can deliberate practice work for me? What she's found in her research is that experts do not log more hours of practice, they just do different practice. They don't just, it's not about the time of that, it's the quality of the practice. Even world-class performers can only practice, I'm talking about Olympic, kind of, athletes, things like that. Musicians, whatever it is 3 to 5 hours a day. And again, this is what they do for, their days. They can only do 3 to 5 hours on that goal. There is need for rest and recovery because of the mental and physical stress it can place on somebody. So the idea is that you want to achieve flow, a feeling of effortlessness at a level that's really a high challenge. So when you've gotten better at something, it sort of flows better and it's not really as much a challenge anymore. That is, that idea is that flow is you need to develop that through developing a taste for hard work, through deliberate practice. That idea of like things being hard to do is important to find that flow, because when you're in a challenging situation, you won't be weighted down by it. You'll feel that. And what she found is that you need to seek out challenges in order to do that, whatever it might be. Your stretch goal doesn't have to be academically related. It can be anything. That's something that's a challenge for you, a weakness that you need to look at. What she found in her research also is that grittier adults experience more flow and more enjoyment when they're doing hard work, which kind of makes sense. That's where she found that. So as you work hard, you develop a thrill of getting better. And making deliberate practice a habit is important of that, like just that idea of embracing challenge and really buckling down. It may not be enjoyable, but the idea is that eventually it will be, because you will have experienced hard work and real challenge and getting better, and then you will get flow. So one of the things I want you to think about at the bottom too is create a work environment in school, at home, in school and at home that supports hard work. If you're laying in your bed and you're doing your homework and it's more, it's also a place where you hang out, that might not be a good environment, because the habit is that you hang out more, it's more enjoyable to hang out than it is to do hard work, right? So you may want to have a desk. You want to have a place like your bedroom is where, you kind of hang out and have your own space, but you do your work somewhere else, so that you have those two compartmentalized places where you have rest and recovery, but also you have a place where you are buckling down and you're like, yes, this is my focus and concentration, and this is what I'm going to do. This is my practice. Okay. At the very bottom of the page, I want you to look at, to work on your first stretch goal. What are your plans for deliberate practice? When are you going to do it? I know what it is. You're going, your stretch goal is your stretch goal, right? But what is it? How are you going to focus is one thing. What are the things that you need to do? But then how are you going to practice that? How many times a day are you going to work on this stretch goal? What are the things that you might do to work on that stretch goal, and so forth. So write down some work and so forth. What are some ideas that you have to plan on that? No right or wrong answers. I just want to see what you come up with, and so forth. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see sort of a roadmap for that. Deliberate practice is, getting a SMART goal. That's that stretch goal that we have, and then practicing and focusing, getting feedback, and then accessing your limits. What are the things that you're limited in, and how can you use a teacher or substitute? And then all in the middle of there is maintaining motivation. Okay. Even though it may not be as enjoyable to do the practice, is getting that idea that in the future you may have flow, and that's going to be important. At the bottom, you can see deliberate practice involves in designing something to improve your performance. So that's what you're your plan for deliberate practice is that getting some help, maybe. Maybe part of your plan is if to practice something, you need to, go to a coach, athletic coach, or you need to go to a teacher, or you need to look up something, or what, I don't know what it is. You need to get some outside information to help you with that goal. Repeat a lot, right? So what's your time frame you're going to do? What's your plan? How many times a day are you going to practice it, and so forth. How might you get feedback? Where are you going to get your feedback? Mentally demanding. It needs to be mentally demanding. So make sure you pick a stretch goal that's challenging to you. That's not, a strength. It's a weakness. And remember, it's not going to be that fun. Okay. Grit is not about fun. All right. And it is effective though for success. And that's what I want you to understand through this whole thing and through practice is that hard work is hard work. But the success and the feeling that you get once you do hard work and you figure stuff out can really lead to enjoyment and much more success in the future. Okay, so fill that grit activity out and go ahead and submit that. You can type right on it, you can write on it and then submit a picture of it, whatever it might be. Just make sure it's in a form that I can watch. You can do a media recording if you want to show that. But I need to be able to read it because I sort of want to see what your answers are, not for my own sense of like evaluating you, but more of I just want to see what you guys came up with to see how effective the activity was and your understanding of it. Okay, go ahead and pause the video, finish that, and then come back to the video and we'll continue with our mini lesson on the brain. Okay, so a couple things I want to talk about. And just briefly that I would do in class right before you work on your zombie plague is talk about plasticity and neurogenesis. You need to take these notes down. These are two specific things you need to take notes on, just like we've done in, about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system and neurons and things like that. And so I want to talk about that. What is powerful to know about the brain can change, and it can change in function and structure. So I want to talk about two types of plasticity and then neurogenesis, what those are and what it talks about with the brain. So write down functional plasticity. And again, I'm going to go, and then if you need to pause the video after the slide, then you can go back and write things in. Functional plasticity is the brain can shift functions from damaged to undamaged areas. And that's really kind of cool is that undamaged areas actually can take over the rehabilitation and take over the task for that other side of the brain when it's not working. So when somebody has a stroke, then eventually that can be rehabilitated. Structural plasticity is the brain's ability to change its physical structure in response to learning, environmental influences, new learning, and things like that. It can actually increase connections and abilities. It's also known, and also another word that's increased with that is neurogenesis. So the idea of genesis is the idea of producing more. And so when we are challenged, I know we've talked about this before, we actually can increase our brain matter. An example of this is a study that they did on, and they tested it with MRIs, is learning to juggle. And they had people actually do juggling. They learned to juggle. They didn't know how to juggle before. Juggling is something that's extremely hard, but it took them about a few months to figure out how to juggle. They took an MRI before they started learning how to juggle, and then once they had mastered juggling, and what had happened is it increased the brain temporarily 3 to 4% in gray matter, and that it was gray matter that they were in the areas where we perceive, remember, and any kind of visual motion. So think about parts of the brains that would do it: perceiving, the parietal area. Remembering, there's different parts of the brain for remembering, but like hippocampus might be one of those in particular. And then anticipating visual movements. So any of the occipital stuff in the back, anticipating parietal as well, and so which is super cool. So they've even found changes in the hippocampus when people have been playing video games. So there was a study that was done on primates, chimpanzees and so forth, and they gave them video games to play, and they found that there was a lot of new neurons in the place where you have memory formed, your hippocampus. So super cool. So it makes sense that neurogenesis can be affected by age, exercise and stuff. So age, as you age, your ability to create new neurons and so forth starts to degenerate. And so we've talked about how if somebody is doing some challenging kinds of things, also with exercise, that they can actually reverse the 1 to 2% that we lose per year. Also think about stress. Stress also affects your neurogenesis, and you can actually lose some of your brain efficiency because of stress. Social status can also affect it. And why is social status? Well, when you live in a more impoverished, unenriching environment that has less challenges, that neurogenesis is less and less. And so again, with elderly, we want to keep them in more challenging situations. One cool thing I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and I want you to watch this video. It's very short and it's also got some cool like experiments to do to see how good your brain works. Do video games rot your brain? So I know a lot of you might be interested in this and what psychology says about it. So you have a little bit of a, sort of a hint with Gould's study on the primates and when they were playing video games in the hippocampus. But go ahead and watch it and pause the video and go ahead and watch it and then come on back. Okay, so fun stuff there. Okay, so this is really cool. I wanted to show you another video of a split brain patient so you can kind of see, and now that you know some things about neurons, you can see why this happened. Split brain operations were started in the 1940s. And at first they thought they had no effect. It reduced the seizures, and basically they were reducing the fact that the neurons were firing from one hemisphere to the other, and it was causing some disruption and really disorganized. So then the body sort of shuts down and gets into these seizures. So they saw that was disappearing, but they didn't realize how fascinating the brain actually was. So what I want you to do is pause the video and watch the Michael Gonzaga video. Watch up to about the part where the split brain patient is looking at pictures of books and faces and their paintings, the actual paintings that he looked at. So then pause the video now, go to that video, and then come back and I'll explain to you what happened. So I can see it's really, really cool. This is a good one. And what you see is that basically when the right side of the brain is shown something on the other side, it's not going to be able to produce any kind of like, oh, this is what I saw, because this side of the brain is not working with this side of the brain. So the speech production is on your left side, and when it's shown to the opposite side where it's not processed, that's why he doesn't understand he can't produce what he saw except for when he drew it out. He can't actually physically make the word come out because it was processed, but this side of the brain didn't process it, so it's hard to it processed it to draw it on a piece of paper. He just can't produce the speech of it because that part of the brain wasn't hit on there. So it's really, really cool. When he's shown the paintings, what's really cool is we know that lateralization, the left side of the brain produces speech and also understands speech, your Broca's and your Wernicke's area. What you don't know is on the lateralization side, on the right, what's lateralized or localized, what happens only on the right side of the brain is we see faces. So that's the reason why he sees the artwork the way he does. When he's shown it on through the left side, it's on the left side and it's being processed by the right side of the brain, he sees a face. But when he's shown the same painting and it's on the right side, it's being processed by the left side of the brain, which does not have the faces connected because the corpus callosum is cut, and he sees books. So he sees completely different things because both sides of the brain are not working together. They are separate and apart. You can really see that with the paintings. It's super cool. So hope you enjoyed that. So one of the things that came out of this is that language, reading, and speech functions are performed by the left side and so forth, as we talked about, and the nonverbal emotions, spatial tasks, puzzles, faces, copying, drawing, reading, maps, come a lot from the right side, which is why people kind of say the right side is more creative and the left side is more analytical. So, okay, kind of a couple of things for that. So what do you need for your zombie plague and to create your cure today? That's going to be your last thing that you need to do today, and you're actually going to make a slide and you are going to create a cure on your own that then you're going to kind of share with your group, and you guys are going to kind of put that all together when we get back into groups, okay? Neurotransmission, again, is going to start at your dendrites at the top of the neuron. There's going to be a message sent that starts with neurotransmitters that's going to turn into electrical charge. It's going to make its way as a wave down the axon to the bottom to the terminal buttons, and that's where it's going to release certain neurotransmitters through the synapse that's going to then connect to the next neuron. Okay, so in talking about, we have a real understanding now, we should, from the last virtual day of the synapse and what's going on. And you really, I went back to this slide in particular because all those little red things are your neurotransmitters. And that's how you're going to create your cure. You're going to decide in the drug that you give them what neurotransmitters they don't actually have enough of or they have too much of, and you need to block something or you need to make something happen. This doesn't have to be like super expertise. You just need to use a couple of neurotransmitters so you get the idea of what it's going to be like. But the neurotransmitters are going to act like these that are natural in the neurons, and they're going to fill these receptors on the next neuron, and that's going to create a message going through the body. That's how drugs work. They attach just like a neurotransmitter, and they bring that message through the body so that there's a change in behavior and so forth. So a couple of the things that might help with you is how some of these things work. So how drugs work and how different neurotransmitters work. So for instance, we all know that black widows are really dangerous. Black widows, when they bite somebody, they cause acetylcholine. That's that neurotransmitter deals with neuro muscles like the one that is in mustard gas from World War I. So it causes acetylcholine to be released too much. So the venom releases acetylcholine too much, and it causes muscle spasms that can then lead to death if somebody is small enough when they're bitten by a black widow. Another example of a neurotransmitter is an antidepressant, which any of the antidepressants are Zoloft, Paxil, Prozac. What they do is they inhibit. They're inhibitors. They're an antagonist drug, and they're a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So serotonin is the neurotransmitter, and basically what all of these antidepressants do is they inhibit the reuptake of serotonin. Okay, so as you have the synapse, right, and you've got all this extra serotonin that's kind of floating around. Normally what happens is that all that serotonin gets brought back up into the original neuron, and it doesn't get pushed out into the body to the next neuron. What the drugs do is it blocks the reuptake. So in the original neuron, it blocks that reuptake by binding, chemically to the neuron, and then it keeps the serotonin in the synapse. So all the serotonin is still floating around. So once those receptors are freed up from the other serotonin being passed out, then more serotonin gets flooded into the body. So then the person feels better. So some of those are they kind of block so that more of that neurotransmitter are naturally in the body. Okay. The second example, cocaine. How does that happen? So cocaine, like any drug, can interfere with the reuptake of dopamine. So what we have is dopamine is going to be flooded into the body, okay? And it creates addiction and withdrawal. So if we have that reuptake and it naturally comes out, we definitely have an effect. And it should say less receptors are created because the drug's kind of causing it to have a disruption in receptors. Nicotine is an agonist drug. So antagonist blocks things. Agonist actually makes things, creates things happening. It doesn't block anything, it adds to it. So nicotine stimulates things like acetylcholine, and it causes muscle stimulation, and your heart races faster because of that. And an example of an antagonist drug that blocks is nioxin. That is the drug that helps with overdoses. So it blocks the effects of a neurotransmitter, and it blocks endorphin receptors to reverse the effects of heroin and opioids and so forth. Okay, so those are just some ideas of sort of how that sort of works. I know that may not, but there's kind of a couple of things that you can do. So on the Canvas, I've actually given you this chart, and there's a list of different neurotransmitters that I went over on the last virtual day on the neuron research mission sheet. And it tells you what's the effect if you have too much or too little, and then and so forth. And so you can kind of decide if you want more of one neurotransmitter or you want less of one neurotransmitter. So you're going to use the chart. You can also use outside information if you want to use neurotransmitters that I have not talked about. You can do that to add to your cure. Now, the biggest thing too is to remember that you have two types of drugs. You have an agonist drug that's going to trigger a response, and you have an antagonist drug that's going to block and stop a response, or it could block something from happening so more of the neurotransmitter is in the body, okay? So you want to kind of think about whether or not your drug's going to be a little antagonist or agonist or a little bit of both, or you're going to have one or the other. You can decide what kind of drug you want to create, an agonist drug or an antagonist drug, and then what neurotransmitters you're going to put in that drug, because that's exactly what is in drugs, regulated neurotransmitters. So in your medical specialist group, you're going to be doing this again separately without them, but you're going to create a drug that can cure the zombies. So you're going to be able to name your drug yourself. Okay, we're not working on your groups in this. You're going to actually bring your slide, and you'll have it next time when you get in your groups, and you guys can kind of decide what you want to do. You're going to name your drug. You're going to describe the contents of your drug. That means what neurotransmitters are in your drug, which ones you're going to pick, and what each part of the drug is going to do to cure the zombies. So again, you want to think about what are the behaviors: staggered, rage, appetite, stupidity, and then what kinds of things can help with some of those behaviors, and what parts of the brain they will affect. Okay, so this is a big portion, like what's the neurotransmitter, what do you think it's going to do, how it's going to help. Okay, remember, I don't think that you're an expert in all of this, and it's so much harder when you're doing it at home, but that's okay. It's just having the experience of the neurotransmitters, sort of coming up with this. Be creative about your drug. Create one slide, or you can create two if you want, but one slide is is what you have to create, with the name of the drug, what neurotransmitters, what parts of the brain and behaviors it's going to address. You can even decide how you want to administer it. You want to put down, is it an agonist, antagonist, or both? Does it do both? Is there some that you're going to have agonist neurotransmitters doing something, antagonist doing something, or you're just going to have one type of drug, agonist or antagonist? So again, name of the drug, is it agonist, antagonist, what neurotransmitters are in it, and then what parts of the brain and behaviors will those neurotransmitters address for the drug. Okay, that's what you have to do. Create a Google slide and submit it today. Okay, if you have any questions, I will be available in the morning for questions, and you can try me anytime, and I can try to address your questions throughout the day, but in the morning it's mostly, I'm available mostly then. Okay, have a great day, everybody.